a lot of this stuff I'm going to talk about probably mimics or picks up on the points that the Vice President just said. So, first of all, I should say I'm honored to be here and have the opportunity to talk in this intimate gathering, in this small room with very few people, both in the room and outside the room, about some of the communication challenges that face the European Parliament, the EU, and others. And maybe just as means of introduction, I could just explain who WPP is. Antonia gave us a big build-up. We're probably responsible for about a quarter to a third of media communications, both traditional and new being new social media, new media being about 40% of our business against a market weighting of about 25% worldwide. So we're about double the weight in terms of new media, so we're highly orientated to that. We have 190,000 people in one way or another in 112 countries. So with that as background, let me just say a little bit about where we are as an organization and where I am personally in relation to Europe. I am personally committed to the European project. Britain obviously is facing a European referendum shortly, and we have been active and will remain active in arguing for that Britain should stay in. The EU matters to WPP as a major European employer and investor. We have over 45,000 people in the European Union. The European Union accounts for about a third of our revenues. We're sort of equally balanced between the US, Europe, and the BRICS and the next 11, what we call the fast growth markets. And we have invested in M&A activity, which is the principal activity where we extend, apart from organic growth, about 900 million euros in the EU itself over the last decade. Now, picking up on what the Vice President said, we know that trust, and this is the context, we know that trust in governments worldwide, it's not just in the EU, is at a low point. The EuroBarometer, which the Vice President referred to, shows that Europe is no different. Distrust has been rising significantly. It's interesting, the Vice President said, is it due to knowledge or conviction? I would say that you can alter conviction if there's knowledge. So the two things, to my mind, are not separated, they're interlinked. And you're going to hear more about the detailed findings of the EuroBarometer from Edouard Lesurf of Taylor Nelson Sofres, which is part of our group, later today. Europeans say that they need a clear message from the EU. They don't know what the institutions achieve for them, or indeed the difference between the various institutions. Yet the European communication agenda is constantly hijacked by crises, as we are at the moment, and by issues surrounding those crises. It's almost like a stasis or paralysis creeps in whilst you're dealing with the issue. Europe is always, again, as the Vice President said, a bad news story in national media. However, it's not all bad news. Firstly, all large organizations and all large institutions are facing a loss of trust and increased skepticism from the public, particularly in Western democracies. It's part of a long-term shift from a deferential culture to a referential culture. So you are not alone, if that gives you any comfort. Secondly, there's been a clear improvement in trust in the EU over the last few months. So there is hope that this will change. And actually, if you look at the data, that is quite significant. So turning to the challenges, it is clear that Europe faces a huge communication challenge. And let's break it down. But before I say that, let me pick up on a point that the Vice President made. We overcomplicate what we do. If you said to me, looking at the commercial sector, the private sector, where are there the best examples is where people have a clear vision and they agree on that vision and implement it. But it has to be simple to get the message across. And in the area of challenges, and the huge communication challenge that Europe faces, let's try and break it down. And I think there are three specific challenges. Firstly, a consistent narrative. How will you tell the same story throughout every policy area, every crisis, every institution? And the nature of this conference is highly fragmented. So how do you bring highly fragmented organizations and a structure together? By the way, this bedevils every piece of government communication that we're involved in. We have formed, so we're organized vertically, different brands. So J. Walter Thompson Company, Ogilvy and Mather, Young and Rubin Gray, Group M, whatever it happens to be. And what we're increasingly doing is horizontalizing, if that word exists, our operations. We're trying to bring together teams at a client level and at a functional level and a practice level that are meaningful. One of the things we've done is form a horizontal practice on government, social, and economic. And that's to try and integrate in our own organization our approach to communication. So the first thing is a consistent narrative. And by the way, if you said to me, what's the best example of a government that integrates? I would give you two examples. One would be Singapore. Now that's easy because it's, or easier, because it's 5 million people in one pretty narrow location and has a history of, let me say, strong leadership and continued strong leadership. And the other, actually, as an example of communication, and I'm not blowing the British trumpet, but I will mention the government campaign, the Great British Campaign, which for the first time has unified across government departments with the same template virtually every piece of communication that comes out of the British government. My view is the British government don't invest enough in that communication program, but it is a very good example of consistent message delivered in a consistent way. The second issue, and again, the Vice President touched on this, is reaching citizens. How will you reach and engage citizens in a world in which digital is fragmenting audiences, overwhelming citizens with content, and new platforms appear every week? And the third, again, the Vice President touched on this, listening. How will you listen to citizens and show them that you are listening, creating a genuine engagement which builds trust? The starting point, as with any communication, must be to listen and to understand our audiences, and research, or what we now call at WPP data investment management, is the first step. Now let me just turn to the opportunities. Firstly, the consistent narrative. The majority of Europeans say the institutions need a clearer message. This is not new. The ask for a clearer message is not reflecting a need for more information about the EU, though. There is already enough. We have too much information. Adding more will result just in information overload. The key is to get the right information to the right people at the right moment in the right shape. Citizens and stakeholders need to have a consistent experience of Europe. A crisis, easy for me to say, but a crisis should not divert you from the consistent narrative. It is an opportunity to demonstrate your narrative in action. Now, I know that politics is different, but WPP has a very clear strategy. It's fast growth markets, it's digital, it's data, and what we call horizontality. That is it. Every day, in a micro way, we get diverted by crises in our own organization, not as big as the crises that you face, from that mission and that vision. We always try and pull ourselves back to the vision. So it shouldn't divert you. You have to stay on message. For example, you can communicate about the role of the EU in handling some of the most difficult post-war crises effectively. Syrian refugees, climate negotiations, investment plans, infrastructure, etc. These cutting issues cannot be solved at a national level. This is an opportunity to tell a positive, consistent story about the EU's role in solving global and regional problems. And whilst it's important that citizens understand what the EU institutions are doing, it is not about as much about you, it is about them. Through communications, the EU needs to become meaningful for people and to generate an emotional bond. This common EU narrative will, of course, translate differently for different EU actors at European, national, regional, and local levels. And as communicators at different levels of the story, you can all use your own building blocks, national stories, themes, policies, hot news, to continuously support the common story. So that's the first area, which is consistent narrative. Let me just turn to reaching citizens. The EU institutions are not immune from trends that are reshaping the communication landscape. 50% of our revenues, so our revenues are $23 billion, our billings are $76 billion. 15 years ago, 50% of our revenues are different. In 15 years, we've changed at least half the base. In another 15 years, I would postulate maybe all the revenues will change in nature and shape. You must stay on top of digital transformations. You must understand how audiences are influenced, how they are consuming content, and be agile and ready to react quickly. Let me just give you some examples. Our work at Blue State Digital, the name of the agency, on campaigns for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, used sophisticated big data analytics, email and social media to engage grassroots communities for fundraising and for issue management. A second example, our work for the European Parliament elections last year included an online creative marathon where we crowdsourced ideas from young people and animated them in nearly real time. A third example, we worked with the UK government on highly effective behaviour change campaigns, such as Stoptober, a campaign to help people give up smoking. We used sophisticated social media, we used apps, we used digital content, and Stoptober saved the National Health Service £10 million in the first year alone. The keys to all this are rigorous media planning and media buying and appropriate fast content. Effective media planning and buying will enable you to take advantage of innovation and data, such as through automated programmatic buying. We don't like using the phrase programmatic buying because we are employing technology, data, and content to build that programmatic, targeted media buying in a more sophisticated way. All this will allow you to target audiences more accurately and to reach more citizens for less money. One of the attractions, supposedly, of online media, which, as I remind you, is 25% already of worldwide media, is the absolute cost seems to be reduced. There are issues about measurement. There are issues about bots. There are issues about the hurdles on measurement in comparison to offline media. But essentially, these are more targeted, more fragmented, more directed, more able, and they can be done for, as I say, less absolute cost. Audiences increasingly have a choice of what content to consume. Content will be ignored or bypassed unless it is mobile, unless it's on demand, and it usually has to be bite-sized, relevant, and tailored, and last but not least, entertaining. You know, a lot of debate, and I don't know how many centennials. Centennials, by the way, are not 100-year-old men and women. There are people who are born after 1997, so 0 to 18. And the millennials, born from roughly 85 or 87, so up to, say, 30 years old or thereabouts, there's a lot of discussion about what their consumption habits are, but basically, most of them are looking for entertaining and engaging content. And there are examples all over Europe and the rest of the world of governments using digital and social media in very innovative ways to engage citizens. And the EU institutions must, in our view, get on board. We've launched, as I said, a dedicated practice for the public sector, which shares best practice across countries in citizen communication. And if you want to get in touch to find out more, I'd be delighted, obviously, to help you with that. The third area is listening. So we talked about consistency, we talked about reaching citizens. The third area is listening. Many communication strategies claim to include citizen engagement, dialogue, and two-way communication, but many don't do it in reality. And that's a finding of a new research study by a Professor Jim McNamara of the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia. He researched both governments and companies in several countries. He found that although most claimed to listen to their audiences, very few had the organizational ability or structure to do so. I come back to what I said before, clear vision, clear strategy, and a structure that enables you to implement. Even well-intentioned consultation processes often fail because they are hijacked by a vocal minority, they are highly technical and not accessible to non-experts, there are too many, leading to participation fatigue. We need to develop more innovative, more inclusive ways of listening. We need to listen in a way that everyone can participate and engages people so that they want to participate. Most importantly, it's not enough to listen. We must close the loop and show that we are listening by responding, and that is what builds trust. Let me just give you one example, and it's from the private sector, and it's from the private sector in China, a company called Xiaomi. I don't know how many of you know this, but they are actually probably the market-leading handset manufacturer already in China after 4 years. What is really interesting is that every Friday, 500,000 software engineers get online, and Xiaomi sends out crowdsourced software development, the latest changes. It's an Android platform, in the Android platform, and they run a competition for which is a free competition. They get free advice, and these 500,000 engineers give their view on a Friday afternoon, I think it is, and over the weekend it's processed. So this is crowdsourced software development. It's probably the best example that I can think of this sort of listening and building trust. And you build a fan club of people, 500,000 of them, which even in a Chinese area is large, and builds trust and loyalty to the brand. So let me ask you, as I go towards the end, are you ready as an institution? So you know what you need to do. You have a clear message and you communicate it in everything you do. You form your communications for the digital age, and you listen and you show to the electorates that you're listening. Doing this will need you to be ready, organizationally ready, culturally ready, and skills ready. And I've got 2 challenges for you here. You must think through these questions before you can get to those solutions. Firstly, you have to give up some control to foster dialogue with citizens. Many governments aspire to a genuine dialogue and two-way exchange with stakeholders and citizens. Attempts often fail because public institutions are afraid to lose control over the message. And there are many ways that digital and social media can enable interaction between citizens and institutions, and between citizens and their fellow Europeans. But interactivity and dialogue mean that you have to let go 100% control of the message. You run the risk that people will say things that you don't like, and this is the trade-off between dialogue and control. So my challenge to EuroPCom is, how prepared are you to take a managed risk to have an authentic dialogue with citizens? Do you have the political support to do this? Do your systems and processes give you the freedom to loosen the reins enough to have a real conversation? In my experience, moving from a top-down broadcast approach to genuine engagement requires brave leadership. So you have to be brave. The second thing is you have to be comfortable with disintermediation or disruption. Traditionally, institutions have communicated with citizens via the media because that was the only way you could reach mass audiences. This means that citizens often receive your messages filtered via a third party who may have their own agendas. Digital, particularly social media, gives institutions and individual politicians the ability to reach audiences directly without relying on journalists as gatekeepers. I can remember one example of a mayor with, I think, 2,000 citizens who governs by Twitter, who every time he has a policy message to think about, engages in Twitter communication with his 2,100, I think it was, people in his community. On the surface, this disintermediation is very attractive. It gives you complete control of the message, your message, and the ability to target audiences very precisely. So should we forget about journalists and focus on talking to the citizens directly or entirely? The answer is that you have to do both. Traditional media is still, on a global basis, television, linear TV, and traditional print and magazines and newspapers are still roughly 2/3 of global media. The answer is that you have to do both. This means talking to the media, but also having the confidence in your own voice to have direct conversations with citizens without the media getting in between. So, conclusion. Number one, I have a personal belief in Europe, and over the coming months, we will demonstrate that personal belief. Secondly, communication is key to democracy, it's key to trust, and it's key to engagement. We congratulate, if we can be, with humility, EuroPCom for prioritizing this important issue. And we're proud, obviously, that WPP works for governments around the world and has a dedicated government and public sector practice. Now, unfortunately, I have to go back to the UK tonight, so I will not be available for the Q&A session. But I'm very happy to take Qs and maybe give you As. My email address is msorrell, you don't have to put the S in, msorrell, S-O-R-R-E-L-L, @wpp.com. Feel free to communicate, in this case directly, and I'll try and answer your questions. Thank you very much.